Today, we're diving into a really cool part of the legal system. It's basically a set of principles designed to step in when following the law to the letter, well, it just doesn't lead to a fair result.
For centuries, legal systems have bumped up against this huge problem. What do you do when a decision is perfectly legal, but it just feels wrong, completely unfair? That's the exact question that gave birth to the principles of equity we're talking about today.
So, here's our game plan. First, we'll look at why the law isn't always fair. Then, we'll see how equity steps in as a different kind of justice. We'll get into its guiding principles, see them in action with some real examples, and wrap it all up by looking at why it's called the conscience of the law.
Okay, so first up, when the law isn't fair, think about it. The bedrock of our legal system, what we call the common law, is all about rules and following past decisions. And that's a good thing, right? It creates predictability, but that can also be a huge weakness. What happens when a situation is just so unique it doesn't fit into a neat little box? Or when someone is obviously doing something morally wrong, but technically they haven't broken a specific rule? That's the gap. That's the problem. And to fill that gap, we have something called equity. It grew up alongside the law as a different, much more flexible brand of justice. And you can really see the difference here. On one hand, you've got the common law. Super technical, very rigid. On the other hand, there's equity. It's built to be the exact opposite. It's flexible, it's responsive, and here's the kicker. It actually looks at how the people involved have been behaving. It cares about their conduct. It basically brings a sense of, moral judgment right into the courtroom.
Now, it's super important to get this straight. Equity doesn't just throw the law out the window. It works with it. It's right there in the quote. Equity supplements the law, or it bases itself on the law. It's there to fill in those gaps we were talking about, using the law as a starting point, but stepping in when plain old justice really demands it.
So you might be wondering, how does a judge actually use this flexible, conscience-driven justice? Well, they have a kind of toolbox, and that toolbox is filled with something called the Maxims of Equity. So what's a maxim? It's basically just a short, punchy statement that captures a really big idea, a broad principle. You can think of them as these classic sayings that really get to the heart of what equity is all about. They're the guideposts for a judge trying to figure out what's fair. And this is where it gets, honestly, kind of weird and really interesting. These maxims, they aren't laws, not at all. They're just guidelines. A judge only pulls them out when they feel it's the right thing to do. And get this, there's no logical order to them. They can totally overlap, and you can even have one maxim that says the complete opposite of another one. It's less like a rigid rulebook and way more like a collection of ancient wisdom. Okay, so to stop this from being so abstract, let's actually look at a few of the big ones to see how they work in the real world. All right, here's a big one. This is pretty much the whole reason equity even exists. It says, equity will not suffer a wrong to be without a remedy. In plain English, if someone's been wronged, the court needs to find a way to make it right. So what this really means is that if you have a totally legitimate right, but some kind of legal technicality, some tiny procedural mistake is blocking you from getting justice, this maxim gives the court the power to step in and provide a fix, a remedy. It's there to make sure a simple procedural slip-up doesn't lead to a massive moral failure. Now this next one, I love this one. It's so simple, so fair. He who seeks equity must do equity. It basically flips the script and puts the focus right back on the person who's asking the court for help in the first place. Basically, it's saying this: if you're coming to the court asking for fairness, you better be prepared to act fairly yourself. You can't ask for a special, flexible, equitable remedy and then plan on turning around and being unfair to the other person. You have to be ready to do your part to fulfill your side of the bargain. And a perfect example of this is something called the doctrine of election. So picture this. In one single document, Jane gives a gift to Mary. But in that same document, she also gives something that Mary already owns to a third person, Sarah. Well, equity says Mary can't have her cake and eat it too. She can't accept the gift from Jane, but then refuse to let Sarah have her property. If she wants the benefit, she has to accept the burden that comes with it. No cherry picking. Okay, last example for today. So what happens when you have a real puzzle? Two people, both with a totally fair, totally legitimate claim to the very same thing. How on earth does a court decide who wins? Well, this is where this next maxim comes in. It's a simple, clean tiebreaker. If the court looks at both claims and decides, yep, both of these are equally valid, equally fair, in other words, the equities are equal, then it needs something else to break the tie. And that something else is time. The rule is as simple as it gets.
Whoever's claim was established first wins. The first in time prevails. It's just a really straightforward way to cut through a deadlock when all else is equal.
All right, let's bring this all home. So what's the big picture here? What is equity's real job in the grand scheme of things?
You can think of equity as the law's moral compass. It's the voice that steps in and says, hold on a second. It makes sure that in our quest to follow the rules, we don't forget the whole point, which is to achieve a truly just and fair result. It's that critical dose of flexibility, of conscience, that a rigid system absolutely needs. But all this leaves us with one last and pretty provocative question. Remember how we said a judge uses these maxims when they feel it's appropriate? Well, that brings up a huge question about what justice even is. If fairness comes down to a judge's personal feeling, who's checking the judge? Who checks the conscience of the court? Something to chew on. Thanks for joining.